a board member with Cultural Connections, and Ariana Bader at the back is also on our board. We planned tonight, and we're so glad that you all can make it out. First, we just want to say a big thanks to Ashara Ekundayo, whose wonderful gallery is the space we're in tonight. Ashara is a catalyst, a consultant, a curator, convener, and as I said, she's going to share a little bit about the space we're in now.
Right now? Yeah. Right now. Well, welcome everyone. Feel free to move about the room and move your chairs. I think they're trying to keep a line of sight for the camera. The little bit of housekeeping is that there's a restroom if you go through the other gallery room and through the sliding door.
I'm happy to show you.
It's right there. Also want to introduce our gallery assistant, Ellie, who is an artist, journalist, and organizer, and also lives at Town Hall. And so, kind of like the genres and the kind of creative art practice melding together and having her in space has been really wonderful. We moved into this building in January, kind of by magic. Our friend who has the gallery in the front has been here for maybe 12 years, Chandra Cerrito, had mentioned to me at the end of a full day of reading applications for her artist in residency program that Crow's work was not going to continue to lease, and I had been to this gallery a few times. It was a really fantastic new media space. And she said, so I just put it up on the Art Normer site. You want it? And I just said yes. I didn't think about it. I didn't read through it. I didn't call my partner, discuss it. And that's okay, because I'm Aquarius, and that's just the way it is. So, that said, for the past 7 years, I was working on a project. I co-founded a company around the block called Impact Hub Oakland, where I was the chief creative officer there until March. And so I am a full-time consultant, and this is my passion heart project. I had a gallery there for 4 years called Omi Gallery. This gallery exclusively exhibits the work of Black women and women of the African diaspora, as well as people in direct partnership with Black women. And so in the Uptown Arts District, there are lots of galleries around the way. There are now still only 4 Black art galleries in the city of Oakland. So this being the 4th one. Joyce Gordon, who's on 14th, Betty Ono, who's on Broadway in 14th, and Donna Harris, who's on college. She's been there about 30 years or so. Yeah, but there used to be about 25 Black galleries in the city of Oakland. And so as we watch the continued shifting of the demographics, the continued displacement, the lack of cultural equity and competency, we continue to have to fight and rebuild and reframe what it means to kind of live in an intersection of justice and beauty and honor. So this is a space that I am unapologetically Black about. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I'm so happy to always have guests to come in and be part of this conversation tonight. To have you all here, to have my homeboy, sit and hold space. Because often my other homeboy to sit and hold space. So these are 2 young men who I've known for a while and have appreciated their creative art practice as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. That was a wonderful introduction. And just to build off of what Ashara was saying at the end there, it was really important for us as we were thinking about what building on solid ground was all about, this idea of community engagement and really looking at how do you build relationships that are trusting and that are balanced, hopefully. That it was really important for us to start to decenter the focus from museums or larger institutions and really think about that. And that starts with the physical space of where we hold our program. So we were so grateful that Ashara was willing to share her space with us tonight. So tonight's program is the last program we're offering of the year for Cultural Connections. For some of you, this may be your first program. We hope not your last. To tell you a little bit more about what we do with Cultural Connections, our mission is to provide a platform to connect, exchange ideas, and share resources to inspire creativity and action for Bay Area museum professionals in the museum, cultural, natural, and science fields. And to be totally transparent, for 40 years we've been generally associated with the museum world, but we want to welcome a larger audience. We should be working hand in hand with other organizations and learning from each other, and that's really what we are about, connecting and learning from each other. So we're going to be taking the summer to welcome new board members for representing voices and institutions across the Bay Area, and by the fall we'll hope to have a really great new slate of programs to offer. So we'll encourage you all to check back to our website in the fall to see what we offer, and hopefully if you're not a member, you might consider it. Really lively, and that's great, and we'll want to have some more moments like that this evening. But I first want to now turn over and introduce our panelists for this evening. We're really excited to have these folks here tonight to talk a little bit about their experience with community engagement. So we have Evelyn Orantes. She's a community inclusion strategist, and she is working for her own company right now, Evelyn Orantes Consulting. She's been an independent consultant working with years of experience on community and organizational projects, but she's also worked with institutions like the Oakland Museum of California and the Levine Museum of the New South. So we're excited to have Evelyn join us here tonight. We have Emily Week from the Oakland Public Library, where she is currently the action librarian. I love that title. Which involves coordinating the community kiosk and veterans center, and she has some really interesting experiences in her previous lives as a circus student, cheesemonger, and grocery store manager. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Next to her we have Ann Weens, who's the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. She has lots of experience going back for a long ways in marketing and communications, and she's worked across the United States in places like Chicago and Oregon. For joining us. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have Max Gibson, who is the founder and creative director of Wine and Bow Ties. If you haven't already heard, an amazing arts, music, and cultural publication based here in Oakland, and they just put on an amazing event, Feels, this past Saturday. And that's not all. He's a journalist, he's a web curator, and entrepreneur working with such impactful community-based organizations like Hack the Hood. So thank you all to our panelists for being here. Yes. So before we dive into questions, we wanted to give our panel each about 10 minutes or so to share a little bit more about their work, specifically kind of talking about how they engage with communities and partnerships in their setting, kind of looking at the question of what does community mean in the context of your work?
Why don't we start on that side?
Does somebody want to volunteer to go first? Thank you, Matt.
10 minutes, really?
10 minutes? Is that how you're going to If you need less time, that's fine.
I don't think you need to hear it for 10 minutes. Yeah, I'll be happy to go first. Wine and Bow Ties originally started as a passion project of mine. I was in college back in 07, 08, and I remember having all these amazing experiences as a college student and having no place to really jot down my ideas. And so I started a really simple blog spot back then to sort of be the repository of all my creative ideas and things I liked and whatnot. And I really fell in love with the process of just expressing myself online and kind of growing an audience. And so over time, I kept with the blog, and and a couple college friends of mine joined in and they started writing, and so it was sort of a group project that we worked on, managing this blog together. And after about 10, 11 months, we had this really small following on our website. I don't know if you guys remember Blogspot, but there used to be a little follower count. There used to be a follower count in the top right corner, so every time I went on the site, it would show how many followers I had. And this is, before, around social media exploding, but I remember being so excited about seeing like 1 and then 2. I thought we were doing like huge stuff, and so that was like 10 months. And then after we had a small following, we thought, what would it look like to kind of bring our online community together in the real world? A lot of what we post on our website is around art and culture, music, creative ideas, photography. And so we really were using it as a platform to sort of highlight the artists and creatives that we were inspired by and we thought were doing really inspiring work. And so that type of content sort of garnered a diverse audience that was reading our website. And so we got to like 10 months, 11 months in, and we said, what does it look like to bring this online community together in the real world? And so we threw an event at a bar. I was living in LA at the time. And we threw an event at this really small bar called the Mandrake. And we invited everyone that was reading the website out to the party. I just remember being so nervous to throw this first event. I was so nervous that I actually sat outside the party and sat in my car and watched people. I thought no one was going to come, so I didn't want to just be standing there in the room with no one else there. So anyway. But it was really fun, and a lot of people came, or not a lot, but it was like this. And it was a really good time, and so we kind of wanted to keep that momentum going, and so we produced events over the past 7 to 8 years, and so we really experimented with a lot of different experiences for our community. So we've tried art shows, and speaker panels, documentary screenings, concerts and whatnot. And so about 3-4 years in, my partner and I were thinking, experimenting with all these different types of experiences. What does it look like to kind of bring together some of the best elements of each? And that's kind of how Feels came to be. Did anyone come to Feels this year? I'm just, just him. Okay. Oh, Marley. Okay, great. So Feels is really an art and music experience. So it's kind of combining like what is an art show mixed with a concert really look like, and so it's kind of that festival mixed together. And so our most recent one was this past weekend in Richmond. Fortunately, in that, most of our events are based in Oakland, and we really like to galvanize the community here. But since Go Ship, it's been a little bit challenging to find warehouse space that's the size to bring about 3,000. We're about 2,500, 3,000 attendees at our Fields Festival. And so finding that type of space in Oakland was a little challenging over the past, or since Go Ship, and so we had to move to Richmond. We did our last event this past weekend in the Cranway Pavilion. And so, it was a really good experience, but I think part of the reason that we're here is to also collaborate with the rest of the community. And Anne was welcomed us into the BAMFA here of Influence recently, and some of our collaborative work on the fields. We partnered with BAMFA to do a preview event to highlight some of the work that the museum was showing. And so, our work is really around promoting diversity, promoting eclecticism, but also, similarly to I think a lot of the other people up here, we're in the business of building a platform, and so that platform can really be used to highlight the creative works of the people that we believe in.
Thank you. And as you started to allude to, part of our panelists tonight was having Anne and Max together to talk a little bit about the collaboration they've recently undertaken between their two organizations, and talking about innovative approaches to relationship building. And so, Anne, if you don't mind going next to talk a little bit more about kind of community within the context of the work in your institution.
Sure.
How it might relate to Max.
So I've been at BAMFA for about 1.5 years. I'm new to the Bay Area. I came here for this job. It's my first museum job. But my whole career has been spent in a mix of art, nonprofit, and higher ed. And I started my career editing an art magazine in Chicago, and it's interesting to hear you talk about wanting to bring your followers together, because that was something that we always did. This was a long time ago, so it was a print magazine only, because there wasn't online yet. If you can imagine that world. But we always did release parties for every issue, because we really wanted to bring, and that was something I've continued with other magazines I've done, because we always wanted to bring the subjects, the writers, and the readers together in real life, in a real space. And I think that where I became really interested in the idea of working very closely and directly with community was when I was working as the communications person for a center at Columbia College Chicago, which is a private arts and media college in Chicago. And this center was called the Center for Community Arts Partnerships, and it existed to create reciprocal partnerships between the college and various communities. And the most important piece of all that was the reciprocal part, and I became really invested in this work. I personally hate the word outreach because it implies one direction, and I became very interested in this work where a large institution, I think this is a little bit what we're going to talk about tonight, a large institution can partner with small community organizations on an equal footing, which is hard when you've got an organization that's large and bureaucratic and has resources, and a smaller one that doesn't, but they both have just as much to offer the other. And that was where the reciprocity piece came into that work so fully. And we as a college learned so much from these small community organizations that we were working with. We always felt like we had the better end of the deal. And I went on to do other things, but coming here to the Bay Area, and my title is Director of Marketing and Communications, so I'm in charge of the advertising, the marketing, all of that stuff for the Berkeley Art Museum and the Film Archive, but and the website and basically all the communication that goes out. But to connect that to what I'm personally interested in, the project that we did with Wine and Bow Ties was really central to that. I'd be really neglectful if I didn't mention the work that David Wilson is doing at BAMFA with so many of with Zoe, who's reading here, has been at the museum. He's brought her in, he's brought the Black aesthetic in. Yeah, his Black, he works with David Brazil on this Black Life series. So he does a lot of workshops through the art lab, but the postcards on everyone's chairs have some upcoming workshops in the art lab that David Wilson runs at BAMFA, and they also, if you bring it, you'll get in for half price if you're in one of the categories that has to pay. And so I've been very intrigued by the work that he does in the museum and connecting it to the community, and wanted to see to the communities, and I wanted to see how we could support that and kind of echo that through the marketing department, where we're, part of what I'm charged with is making sure that people know what's going on at the museum, and I think that, and in a way that, we're doing so much that is, I think, has a lot to offer to a lot of people who don't traditionally come to museums or that museum. And again, one of the things underlying this partnership with Wine and Bow Ties is to help invite people into the museum who hadn't really thought about coming before, maybe, to see if it appeals to them. Because I think that our programming has broader appeal than the faces that I see in the museum every day. And so that's sort of the little, as I'm trying to get the word out about everything we do, and our audiences that have been passionately coming. We have people who come to the museum every week for 40 years. I want to keep bringing them too, but I think that what we do is interesting more broadly than that. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Emily, you want to go next?
Sure.
So again, a reminder, the question is kind of around what does community mean in the context of your work, but sharing whatever you think is really relevant to kind of share with the crowd about how you engage with community.
Yeah, I mean, you know, libraries libraries have a lot of similarities with museums, and then we also have differences. Our community is everyone. Everyone comes to the library. I think our power users tend to be grown-ups and their children, or children and their grown-ups, and then people who are homeless. Libraries, something that I'm interested in, and something that I think is a change in libraries, is we used to talk about having a homeless problem. Like, you know, oh, I've got a homeless problem, there's homeless people all over the library. And now we talk about, oh, we have homeless patrons, how can we serve our homeless patrons better? Which is great. So a lot of the things that I'm looking at right now, I mean, housing is the #1 problem we have in Oakland and the Bay Area. The lack of affordable housing, the things that, I mean, the work that you're doing, you know, the things that you're talking about with the disappearance of African American culture, and it's all related to the fact that there's the housing, we're in a crisis. And it disproportionately affects people who are African American. The number of homeless people, I think, I don't know if it's in Oakland or Alameda County, but 42% are African American, whereas they're only 15% of the total population. So anyway, that's as an aside of just some statistics. So the community that I'm particularly interested in libraries is the homeless community. One of the things that I work on is called the Community Kiosk, and it's basically a space that started out as a veterans center where people could get help basically getting their discharge papers so they could get into the veterans benefit system. And libraries have engaged with the community in lots of ways. They lend books, we talk to people, but we also do programs, and the programs can be everything from like zine making workshops to hiring the children's performer who comes and does magic tricks so I'm totally babbling. This is making me it's nervous. So it's not babbling, and it's fun. I'm having a great time. So anyway, there's this traditional program format of like, I'm going to do a program for you, come to my program and enjoy it. It's not necessarily a format that works for everyone. The population that we have, people who are homeless, tend to come, hang out in the library, do their own thing, use the computers, sleep, read books, but aren't necessarily coming to programs. So, but there are also a lot of services that they need. So one thing that I did is we decided, oh, this drop-in space, what if we had more services than just veteran services? And it started out with Operation Dignity, who actually does services for homeless veterans. A man named Lester came and sat in the area for an hour each week, and we had free coffee, and he would just sort of meet people and talk to them and help them with benefits or hygiene kits or whatever. And then it seemed like a pretty good idea, so we started getting more partners. The EDD does outreach to veterans, so they come in and they do job help for 2 hours every week. The CalFresh comes in once a month and signs people up for food stamps. Who else? We've had the SPCA does like a pet food pantry, so they came and talk about their pet food pantry. There's another organization called Miracle Messages, where they people who've lost touch with family can do, they'll help them get a Facebook page or do like short video and try to get in touch with people to improve their social network. So we basically created this space where people can just drop by, maybe get a cup of coffee, talk to somebody, maybe get a service, maybe just, talk to people. So that, I guess that's one of the community things that I do, and it sort of touches two things. One is our community is our patrons, is the people who are coming in every day, and two, our community is the organizations that are serving our patrons, and how do we connect the two in a way that makes sense for everybody work.
And I think as we're starting to see very clearly, community engagement and the word community means really different things to different people and in different contexts of their work. And so naming that, I think, is really important, and talking about what do we mean when we say our community. And for some folks that's location, for some people it's interests, and there's lots of different ways of defining it. So it's important to be thinking about that. So last but not least, Evelyn,
How are we doing on time?
We're doing great.
Okay, Evelyn Orantes, and I feel like since I have so much time, I'm gonna go with my origin story, right? So my origin story is that I got into the field completely reluctantly. I'm a transplant from Los Angeles, originally born in Central America, Guatemala. I immigrated when I was 5, and so I came to the Bay Area because I was so attracted to the free speech movement. I went to UC Berkeley because I was like, I'm gonna, that age, right? Some of you still there, so stay there. So I came up here, and I used to live on East 12th and 2nd, which is like a block over from where the Oakland Museum in California currently is. And I'd have to go walk. It was right across from the Oakland Unified School District building, and it was right by La Escuelita School, and I used to just walk around, all the way around the museum. Did it for 2 years, did not pay attention to it. It looked like this big concrete building, had no interest in going, it looked like a little fortress. I'm like, and I used to walk right by it, and then we'd take part. And so I remember taking a class, and it was kind of like the whole Black Panthers, Chicano movement class, and it was all about, celebrating our own origins, our own culture, and how mainstream, really co-opted our stuff and sold it back to us, and I was angry, right? So I was like, so I'm setting you up for what went in there. So my friends and I were like, let's just go. We'll have some impromptu picket signs in our pockets, and we'll see what we're gonna do when we get there. There was this big Day of the Dead community celebration happening in the garden. And so we went there really angry with our trenzas, ready to, and so we went, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh. Because here's this amazing celebration, and I didn't see just museum people. I saw my people. I saw my community, and in that moment, community meant people that were like me, and people that had my traditions, and people that understood the depth of these traditions and weren't just trying to do the surface level. And so I started volunteering at the Oakland Museum of California as the Days of the Dead tour guide. And right when I graduated, it just so happened that an entry-level position opened, and I started as assistant curator to the chief curator of education, Barbara Henry, who I'm still working with to this day. I remember telling her, because at the time I was like, I'm just going to work for a year or two, and then I'm going to go to graduate school. And so I told Barbara, I was like, I know the position asks for a three-year commitment, but I'm only going to be here 2. And so 17 years later, I was there at the Oakland Museum for 17 years. It was my first job straight out of college. I had so many positions, like I counted them the other day, and I think including volunteer, I had something like 12 positions in the whole, my tenure that I was there, which I loved, and I just happened to come in at a time where I just was really nurtured. I think people saw that I was hungry for it and really kind of spent the time to teach me and really show me the ways and really got me passionate about the Oakland Museum and then the field. And after I was converted, I want to convert everybody, Because I really grew up thinking, like, why do I need to go to a museum? Like, I had lowriders in front of me. I had all these, like, nice, dressed up women with really cool makeup. I'm like, that's art. And it's not to say that it's not, but I didn't feel like the need. And it wasn't until like I read the gospel and I was like, oh, now I get it. So that became like a real passion for me to kind of keep the door open for other people. And really be like, okay, look, isn't this cool and it's free, or isn't this cool and you're gonna love it, or isn't this cool and we all get to talk about it and we all get to show it off. So that kind of became, that's my origin story to the, to the field. And so now I feel like I keep taking that passion to my consultant work, and I keep on playing with titles. So I know you read my, and I always giggle because I'm always coming up with new titles because I never know what it feels right. And the whole time I was at the Oakland Museum, I had really not random titles, but it was like senior experience developer, and then I was curator of public practice, and then I was, there were never like, because in a place that was, everything was art, history, or natural science, I never fit into any one box. And they always had to come up with these different titles for me so that I can kind of like move around in the way that I knew how. But yeah, I mean, so that was kind of my story. And then now I'm doing the work as a consultant, which I love, and it's so liberating. And I think one of the ways we define community, at least at the Oakland for a while, and I've heard it in other places, I don't think we coined it, but it's the idea of community as an ecosystem. And I always get in trouble with sciencey people. So I'm sorry, sciencey people, because every time I use science terms for non-science things, they're like, that's not what it means. Okay. But, so I wrote it down because I'm like, I was scared of sciencey people, and I'm looking at you, Penny. So a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. To me, what really appeals to me about that definition is that it's the interacting, it's the relationships, it's that we're not alone. There's another great definition by Peter Block, and he talks about community being about this feeling of belonging, that when you're in community, you belong. And so to me, in my mind, community is a hybrid. It's a hybrid of lots of things, and it's fluid, and I think that's why we always kind of wrestle with it. But I kind of like that we wrestle with it. I like that it's not in a box. I like that whenever we're having a project and you're like, oh, what's the context of community here? I like that we have to ask that question, because I think if it's not, it becomes really static, and it's never going to be one thing for all people. So to me, that's really exciting. And so, yeah, so I feel like in my work as consulting, I felt like some of the kind of epiphanies I've had now that I've been out of a 9-to-5 job for a year and a half have been, I really like my time. I like getting up in the morning and having coffee and starting my day when I feel like it. I also was realizing how burnt out I was. I was really burnt out after a long stretch of work. I also realized that as much as active as I was in the community, I still felt, in retrospect, I was still being kind of insular. You become very insular in the field, and you start kind of having these circular conversations amongst each other. And so when you're having circular conversations, you're never getting at new truths. You're just recycling the same thing and saying it in different ways. And so that to me has been really exciting. I feel, as a consultant, I feel a lot more liberated. I don't represent an institution, I represent myself. And that comes with some great pluses, it's that fluidity. But it also means that the return on phone calls when I cold call somebody is a lot less, because I can't say, this is Evelyn from the Oakland Museum. It's more like, this is Evelyn. I'm a consultant. And so I don't always get those calls back right away. And I used to, I'm like, oh, this is different. Yeah, but I feel like I've been able to experience Oakland as a professional more in a way that I imagine an ecosystem works. Like I'm able to move within that ecosystem in a way that I don't feel like I did as much when I was in a 9-to-5 job. And I don't know what, I'm still kind of piecing together what that all means and why it works that way, but I just know that when I was working, the last project I worked on at the Oakland Museum was for the Day of the Dead exhibition, and it was right around the time of Ghost Ship. And so I was in a position where I was working with Oakland Museum, I was working with the Unity Council, which is another nonprofit in the Fruitvale, and it's like 2 blocks away from where the ghost ship fire happened. And when I was working with them as a consultant, they're like, we really want to do something for the 1-year anniversary. We have all these artists that do Day of the Dead altars in Fruitvale, and they really want to do something in honor because it's something that hurts their community. But they feel like they don't want to, misstep because they don't. Not all of them knew personal people there, and so they wanted to honor the people. It's like, can you help me bridge? And it was a really hard thing to do. I mean, it made me really force me to work with the city of Oakland, work with Oakland Museum, work with several organizations. I'm blanking out on the name of the organization I worked with that was directly related to the ghost ship. It was the father of one of the people that perished, and it'll come to me. But it was that mobility and that ability to move around that I felt like started opening up new doors for me. And then when I was trying to bridge these communities, there started realizing that November 2nd is Day of the Dead. November 2nd is Day of the Dead. End of December, January 1 is when they have an annual memory of Oscar Grant. And December 2nd, that's when I missed. So it's November 2nd, Day of the Dead, December 2nd, Ghost Ship, January 1st, 2nd, Oscar Grant. Yet these communities aren't talking to each other. So I hopefully started planting some seeds and really was trying to encourage everybody to meet. And I think there was a little bit of crossover finally on some of the events. I think the idea was like, how do we start all working together? Because we are this ecosystem, but then we all each get in our own little pockets, and then there's not this kind of cross conversation. And so to me, that's what I'm passionate about. I like connecting people. I mean, and it's like, aren't we stronger together with all our resources than separate? And I feel like, that to me is what I'm passionate about, and that to me is my contribution to a healthy community. And since I live in Oakland and work in Oakland, that's where I try to put my energy and my love towards.
Thank you. That's what Cultural Connections is about.
Nice.
I was listening. So we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to ask the panelists some additional questions, but we want to take a moment for self-reflection. So just take a couple minutes to jot down a few thoughts. We have the page that has a box for it on the agenda. Think about your own context that you work in, and of course you can take these home and keep adding to them. But I think we'll move on to some more directed questions for our panel. So each panelist is going to get a directed question, but then we're going to open it up if anybody else on the panel wants to jump in after they've finished sharing. It connects to their work as well. So hopefully we get to build on what we've already learned about each of the panelists' work. So we'll start with Oakland Public Library with Emily. Can you speak to your decision-making process around the kind of services and programs you offer to meet community needs? So kind of how do you stay responsive? What paths do you take? How do you decide what needs are there? And how do you balance, obviously there's only so much you can do. Decision-making process.
So as a system, I wish that I could say that we had a very formal way. We do consistently talk about, we should do a needs assessment. Oh yeah, let's do that formal needs assessment. Okay, now we're gonna do it. And I think we just had a funding measure pass, so now actually we have a little bit more funding and time, so it will actually happen. But a lot of what we do, so we have traditional services like we lend books, we have related services like we lend toys, and then we have sort of new services that are programmatic or related. But I think there's a lot of different ways that we figure out what people need, and one is people just tell us. They either come out, we get a lot of, I think that's one thing that might be different about museums and libraries, is libraries have a lot of interaction with the people that come in the doors. Like, they'll talk, either we'll see what they're checking out, or they'll tell us, oh my gosh, there's no toilet paper in the bathroom. You know, so they talk, or they have other methods like you can suggest a purchase online. And then we also have people come and approach us. A lot of people want to partner with the library. Either they want to use our space, or they want to use like we have meeting rooms, or they want us to sponsor their program so they don't have to pay the cost for the meeting room, which is not huge, but it is a cost. Or like a lot of people will come up and say, I'm a local author, I just wrote a book that I self-published that everybody will want to read, so I'd like to do programs at all of your branches, please. And so that they come up and they tell us, and then we have this, you know, there are a lot of ways on how you can decide, like, is this something that we want to pursue or not? And I think there are sort of system level initiatives, like one of our goals right now is to meet more people where they are, so we're saying yes to a lot of things that take us outside the library. And then there's just like personal interests, like I like food, so not so much at this library, but at the last library I worked at, I used to do a lot of tastings and invite people in to like bring all the tomatoes from your garden and let's share them with each other and taste. So it's, you know, personal interests. Am I answering the question?
Yeah, so I'm hearing you have some feedback loops in place that help you all kind of be responsive. Some of it is, you know, what the interests are of librarians. Is there any other way that, like, you make decisions as an institution? Maybe you could share a little bit about how you operate within the library you work in versus kind of a larger community like the city of Oakland.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak more to like what I do, and I like to do things first and then sort of figure out if they've worked or not afterwards, which is maybe not as useful if you're making more administrative level decisions.
No, so something you had mentioned earlier in a conversation was the freedom to be able to do those kind of decision making at your branch level, and do you want to talk a little bit about how that works in the library system?
I do programs. I don't know that I can.
That's okay.
Wow.
We can come back. Or another part of the question was around, once you've determined there's a need, how do you decide which path you're going to take to get there? So maybe you could talk a little bit more about, for example, how the needs were built around veterans. And how the community kiosks grew.
So the Veterans Resource Center was a state grant. So somebody somebody decided that at a state level got a grant to put veteran centers in libraries all over. And my boss applied for the grant, and so that's how we got the Veteran Center. And then it was just seeing people in the library. I think the reason I'm having trouble answering this is like some of it just there's a lot of direct feedback. You see somebody needs something, and you go, okay, I'm going to create something in response to that. And then if it doesn't work, it's quite obvious because nobody shows up. And it's like, well, you shouldn't do that. So the Veteran Center was a state grant, and then when I started at the library, you know, and reading, there was the point in time count and sort of understanding the depth of the homelessness problem in Oakland, seeing people needing services, and then it just sort of snowballed of starting with one person in the kiosk, and so Lester with Operation Dignity brought in his friend one day, Jeff, from the East Bay Community Recovery Project, and Jeff was looking for people to connect with, so they hung out, and Jeff was like, hey, can I come and spend 2 hours a day in the kiosk on another day? And I was like, sure, and then he had people, and sort of grew from there.
So staying open to opportunities as they arise, and it sounds like part of this is the flexibility within at least your branch and in your position to be able to try something.
Right, yeah, I mean, I'm lucky in that, my boss and I get along really well. She's interested in the things that I'm interested in and is very supportive. And I'm the kind of person that I am okay, like I can get away with stuff sometimes. I think if you're not, it's harder if you're a person that's like, if you're not in a situation where you can bend rules or where you have different consequences, like, that's different. But for me, what I've had a lot of success with is just going like, well, let's go ahead and like, for example, I was trying to publicize my events. I put the flyers outside on the table, so please take them and give them to all your friends. And I realized we have a Facebook page for the whole library system, but not for our particular branch, so we can't create events for the main library, and so I made a Facebook page, and then I texted my boss and said, oh, I just made a Facebook page. She was like, okay, great. The other bosses would probably say, well, why did you do that? It's not part of our digital communications plan. So, that's how I work.
Action librarian.
Action part of So I think what's surfacing here is that depending on the context in which you work, you may or may not have this kind of flexibility, and that your relationship within your organization matters, and who's your boss, who's supporting you, and paying attention to that, and just being aware of, are you able to take risks? If you were in a different position, does somebody not have the ability to take that risk? And so can you kind of be the privileged person in that role to kind of, do something? Yeah, jump in. Absolutely. Panelists, jump in.
Just from being on the kind of the other end of the coin as the head of a very small organization, oftentimes we're reaching out to organizations that are much larger than our own. And the process of finding the decision maker, finding the person that can actually make the decision. I can't tell you how many times we've come to a large entity, and the point person that we have a conversation with, there's great synergy, we're all on the same page, and we're going for months about whatever the collaboration is, and then finally we get to the pitch or the ask, and say, oh, okay, let me just ask my superior, and the superior comes along, and they shut it down so quickly. It was like 2 months of collaboration, so we've gone through that a lot of times, and sometimes I think about us who running Vertex as kind of being a little speedboat in the ocean, and a larger entity like a museum or whatnot, library is large, or maybe a cruise ship or whatnot. And so where we are able to be a little bit more flexible in terms of what we do. There's a lot more often red tape and bureaucracy and love the work that you guys do.
Great. Does anybody else have anything else to add based on that? Okay. Thank you for jumping in, and we'll keep encouraging you all to respond to fellow panelists' questions. Evelyn, can you share a little bit about what you've learned over the course of your career in terms of how you start to do that task of balancing voices in community partnerships? For example, I think Max was kind of speaking to this a little bit about how power dynamics can affect impact and outcomes, and whether it's flexibility, resources.
Well, I'm going to probably enter this conversation a little sideways, and if I get too far off track, bring me back. I feel like part of what I've really been sitting with a lot is how these bigger institutions determine need. And it might be because I've been reading the grant proposal for like last month. And it's really interesting to me that sometimes museums, sometimes other entities come into a neighborhood and say, well, don't you want this? There's a lot of assumptions made as to what the need is. And even when that need is verbalized, there isn't always that moment where you dig deeper and really build that relationship, because it might be like, I want abstract art. And you don't always, you can't always trust that what you're thinking of what they want is actually what they want. And so the kind of cultivation of relationships that has to happen when you're the person that holds all the resources, and someone is really taking a chance on you helping them bring that resource to a larger platform, is a really kind of, I don't know, it's something that I've kind of been sitting a lot with. It's, to me, what you said resonated with that in particular, like determining need, and just sometimes the hierarchies in these institutions don't allow the people that may know. I might be able to act, let's say you came to me, I might be able to act, on this. I might know that this is a great opportunity for my institution, but I'm not in a position of power to do it.
Right.
But yet I'm the front person.
Right.
I'm the community person. You hired me to be the community person, yet I'm not allowed to act on it.
Yeah.
So it puts even, that was always a point of frustration for me when I'm put in this position where I'm the front person and I'm having to always apologize. And for me, living in Oakland, my job doesn't end when I leave the museum. I go to a baby shower and they're like, what the hell is going on? I go to the supermarket and I'm like, oh man, I hate going to the supermarket as it is. So it's like this thing where I feel like I want, if anything, sensitize people to the role, not only of the external community connectors, but also the internal people that may know a little something about what they're doing, and so, anyways, I told you I was going to come at it from left field, but, it's this idea of how do we determine needs and how do we know who are the best translators within our institution? Because that's what I feel like I'm constantly doing. I'm translating museum talk and jargon and process to community groups, and then community group jargon, process, ways of being to museums, and trying to find this bridge that allows them both to shine. And that takes a huge amount of skill. And the other thing I've been sitting a lot with is that for the longest time I was like, community, 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 and it was always kind of like at the bottom of the totem pole. Recently, I feel like the community conversation has really risen in museum field. I feel like every conference you go to is like community, community, community. But then all of a sudden now I'm seeing these shifts, and it might just be, I'm being myopic, I'll grant you all this, but I'm seeing these shifts where I feel like the positions that are community based are kind of either changing completely, or they're merging to like marketing, or they're disappearing altogether. And to me, that feels very difficult because as a person of color, that's why I even got into museums. And that was my entry point. That was probably the only job I could have gotten in a museum at that time. And now that these positions are being elevated, it's really interesting to me that I feel like I go to certain places, I'm like, what do you mean you don't have a community person? What do you mean you don't have a community person? And I'm all for adaptation, changing the game, I get it, like adapt or die. But I think as a field, let's keep an eye on that, because I find that incredibly problematic.
Yeah, so I think
let's join in as you.
there's an identity piece that you didn't, that I'm hearing that you didn't maybe explicitly say, that museums and libraries share nationally. I think it's more diverse locally, but nationally librarians are 87% white. And to me, when you're in Oakland, like, if you have a bunch of white librarians trying to figure out what this multicultural, diverse community wants, like, that's the thing, is how do you how do you bridge that, and how do you make sure, and I think about it a lot when I'm doing the work that I'm doing with people that are homeless. Like, I'm not homeless, and I think it's really easy for me to be like, here, let me do some good for you.
Exactly.
And that's not the way that I want to approach it, but it's a way that without the piece of like true community and like being able to have a discussion and have somebody that has a foot in that ground, like it's not happening.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's a one-way street.
One of the interesting pieces of the structure at BAMPA is David Wilson, who is our engagement associate that I mentioned before, is not actually a staff member of the University of California, Berkeley, and that's very intentional. So because he's sort of hired as a consultant, given a budget, and able to do his thing as an artist. So he's an artist whose project is developing these workshops and these community connections and things. But to give him that freedom and that flexibility that we're talking about being so important, that structure had to be created to be able to make that happen within the institution. And one of the reasons I came to work at BAMF, I've experienced that frustration of being like, yeah, this is great, and then you move it up the ladder and they're like, ooh, that's scary, we're not gonna do that. And I asked a lot of questions about that before I took the job here, to make sure that I would have enough freedom to do, I'm in marketing. I'm not the person whose real job is to do this connecting, but I wanted to make sure that I had the freedom to take on the projects that I thought were important to do, and that was one of the things with the partnership with Wine and Bow Ties that we were able to do it. I did have to go to the director of the museum and say, this looks a little bit like programming, which isn't my job, and he said, well, do it this way, and not this way, and then it won't be programming, and you can do whatever you want. So that's what we did.
And that openness on your end meant the world for us, because it allowed us to activate in a space that we wouldn't have the opportunity to engage our community in the first place. I also think about, when I'm thinking about collaboration, I just feel like, trust a lot of times underlines the communication aspect of collaboration. I remember just the communication, we're talking about the communication between our two entities throughout our collaboration was always really solid and transparent, and that was always great. And I also, as we were talking, when I remember our first meeting together, there was like 15 people. There was like 4 people from our side, and Anne had a good 10, 12 people, and so in terms of getting everybody on board, I think that was really meaningful from the beginning. I remember just walking into that space and being like, okay, they are committed, because they literally are here and they showed up, and so that was really meaningful to us as well. And from there, we were able to drill down and see who held what and really get to the activation. But, I think that open communication and trust is really paramount in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, since we're already on the subject of your collaboration, I wanted to turn the next question over to you both, and you can each take some time to respond based on your own perspective. Can you share a little bit about how you balance meeting internal organizational needs and priorities while trying to stay flexible and open to opportunities like this, to innovative approaches? So how do you maintain your institutional needs, your internal needs, and still be open?
I can start if you
go ahead,
want,
sure.
because that was a challenge, and I'm new-ish, and my position is new-ish, so this was sort of untested territory as far as I know. I mean, the BAMF has been around a long time, so I don't know its whole history, but I knew when Wine and Bow Ties approached us that it sounded like a good fit. It sounded like something that we wanted to do. I was excited about it. My colleagues were excited about it. We had 10 people in the room because I wasn't quite sure where it was going to fit. So I just brought people from all over the museum to see how it, where it would stick. But I just lost my train of thought. But I did lose my train of thought. It's gone. It's gone. It's balancing the priorities. So a university art museum, an art museum in general, is a bureaucracy, and there's a structure to be respected. And again, being new, I didn't want to step on curatorial toes in particular. And we wanted to be involved with Wine and Bow Ties on programming, but I am, as the marketing director, I'm really, really careful to try to not curate things. And so that was one of the more difficult things to balance, I think, because in the way that we found to do it, and this was with the help of the director of the museum who was supportive of the project and sort of helped guide me through the eye of the needle of how to do it without stepping on how to sort of stay in my lane while making my lane bigger as I was driving was to connect the programming that we did for the Fields event to one of our current exhibitions. So it had already been curated, and one of our film archivists, John Shibata, was one of the people who was in that room who got excited about the project, and so he was able to recontextualize work that had already had the stamp of curatorial approval to bring it into the new context of the Fields event and the event that Fields did, and Ryan Lopez did at the museum. So we were able to, I think, find a creative way to bridge that, but it was reliant on having all those people in the room and having those really open discussions and saying, this is the place that I'm not sure I can go. How do we achieve what we want to do without completely overstepping the existing structure of this large institution?
Can I add a question to that?
Yeah.
And it's conglomerating the two questions that you had. It's been something on my mind for over a year now. And it's funny that you're talking about working with the homeless. You have patrons who are homeless. I work at in a museum, and it's in the middle of a city. And we have a lot of homeless around the museum. And I had a seed. I work with school kids. I schedule school programs. And I had a family shelter. There are quite a few around the museum I'm in the city. And they wanted to bring a family over, and that way we said, we'll put it under school programs because everyone on school programs gets in for free. So I had a seed put in my mind. We are in the middle of a city, but you wouldn't know it if you're in it. It's like we are geographically, physically in a space that we are so completely disconnected from. You're miles apart. So how do you, so I always wanted to reach out to those family shelters, like how can we actually be a resource that would be beneficial, and how do you do that that's a genuine partnership, and how do you do that so it's not self-serving? Because our mission is creating relevancy with our art, but we want to create a relationship with our physical community. We have actually a vegetable garden right next door. And we have these families that are around us all the time that are probably like Evelyn when you were growing up. They pass by these white walls that are like Federalist style buildings. They are equally on a different planet. So how do you make it meaningful? How do you do it so it's not self-serving? Because we want you to come and visit our museum.
And I think that is a part of kind of built into the question. How do you meet the needs you have as an organization, whatever those needs are, while still, being open and making sure it's not all self-serving. And I think that tends to happen with larger institutions, but I'm sure, that you do have needs that need to be met. There are priorities you have to meet in any organization, and so that's kind of the crux of the question there. So, Anne, if you wanted to add anything on, otherwise I'd love to turn it to Max to answer that question as well.
I think the one small thing that I would add is that, we're an art museum and film archive, so we are not the right organization to meet all needs. There are many needs that we're not an appropriate organization to meet. There are things that we do very well and other things that we have no idea how to do. And we are, there is no direct way in which we're addressing things like the homeless crisis. Art can have an effect and can raise visibility, and we can show that art, but we are our mission is to ignite the imagination and inspire critical dialogue. So which is, I think, really, really important, because in order to solve these larger societal issues, you have to have people who are able to imagine and have a critical dialogue. And so that's the piece of that we fit. And then we're also a place to spark curiosity and to have fun, but we don't try to meet all needs.
May I ask a question to that? Because is accessibility part of your values or goals?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, because BAMFA isn't in this similar sort. You don't have a family shelter a block away. But if you have a family shelter and there are families, but there isn't access to spark that imagination or curiosity to start with.
That is important. I mean, the things that we've done to try to address that, anyone 18 and under is free. They can bring grown-ups for free. That doesn't mean they feel like they have access, to the point that you made earlier. And so that's something that this partnership is part of that. The architecture of our new building is part of that. On Center Street, in our new building, it's all windows. Big floor-to-ceiling windows, which is not the norm with the art museum. It makes showing the art inside really hard in that particular spot. But it's really important to show people on the outside what's inside, to open it up and have it transparent. And we have a commissioned mural that changes every 6 months to keep it fresh, so that you can access what's going on in the museum without actually having to go through the door, to a degree.
Yeah, to jump in too, I think accessibility is really central to our work as well, just in the sense that, from a content perspective as well as an experience perspective, from a publication, we're always, each week we're putting up different ideas, different artists, different creatives, and so obviously the hope is that when you come to our website, part of what you're seeing that might be familiar to you, but a huge part of it is also making something that may be unfamiliar accessible. And so that discovery process is something that we really hone in on as really foundational to our work as well. And so, I don't know, we've been talking a lot about the collaboration, but I'm not sure if folks can actually know exactly what we did.
Share.
So,
That would be good, yeah.
So, it was really awesome. I have to give a nod to my partner, Will Bundy. He's actually a Berkeley native, and he was one of the people who really pioneered our collaboration as well. But as Fields is approaching in June, we had gotten in touch with them, I think the year prior, about doing something together and wrapping them in Fields. But what we landed on was creating a preview event at the museum. I think it was in April. So sort of a preview event to sort of highlight some of the artists that would be in Fields in the next couple of months, and then also highlighting some of the artists that were in the Way Bay exhibition as well. And so we did an evening event with BAMFA with some DJs, a couple of music performances, and then we were screening some films outside and then also in their theater. And that was a collection of Way Bay filmmakers as well as some filmmakers that were going to be in Fields from our local community. And so there was a little bit of a collaboration there. And then actually Fields had BAMF had a presence at Fields as well. And so that was kind of the process in terms of the collaboration there. But to answer the specific question, I think organizational means you can dream of doing something like this forever. So I don't, I have to be really honest about the fact that working with the museum in this capacity as an individual organization was huge for us in the sense that it really edified all the work, all the art and cultural work that we've been doing over the past couple of years. To officially collaborate in this capacity was really big. And so organizational needs, this was a goal. This was an organizational goal, was working with the museum. So that was a really big piece of it for us.
And you also have relationships with all sorts of artists and other organizations, and so I think building off that idea of kind of how you build those relationships when you are starting to work together on a project or an exhibition, an opening, and both of you can speak to this a little bit more, that staying open while making sure you're meeting your goals. And it sounds like it kind of came together very organically. It fit well, but I think it underlies that there was a lot of openness on your sides to working together. So, you know, the idea of how you came together and how you worked together, I think is really interesting. You could say a little bit more about.
It took a long time.
Great things take time.
Because we kept trying to figure out how we were going to make the pieces fit together within the structure, particularly of the museum. I mean, that was the more bureaucratic side of it that we had to, like, well, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work, this one will, okay. So it was a lot of conversation and time.
I think from our perspective too, I think that in that group buy-in is really important too, and I think that really can only transpire over time as well, in that, like, you know, we've had friends that have been associated with the museum, we've had friends that work with the museum, and so as we were familiarizing ourselves with what we could potentially do in terms of collaboration, each one of those individual relationships that we've had over the past number of years that were in relation to the museum was really impactful in moving us forward as well.
So building on multiple relationships and over time.
Yeah, and also last thing I was going to say is I like that everyone's using the word relationship over transaction. You know, very often, you know, in my past, a lot of you know, collaborations I was hopeful to be relationships ended up just being a transaction. And so you know, just the continued energy around our collaboration is something that we take a lot of pride in as well.
I had something I had a response to your question about working with people on the street level of your arts organization. I work at Counterpulse. I'm a lead house manager there. And Counterpulse, if you don't know, is in the Tenderloin, directly in the Tenderloin on Trek Street. And so a lot of my job is actually engaging with folks who are on the street who would never in a million years go into the organization, even though they know there is an open door policy. They don't have to pay for a ticket. It's just that the programming is very different from what they're interested in, and maybe the space, as much as I might try to make it so, is not accessible to these people, or it doesn't feel like people are welcome, even if we go up and say, you know, you're welcome to be in here. And honestly, from my work with people who are unhoused or homeless, and being a space that, you know, being on the street level, but then also being a part of something that's kind of away from the street, separate from the street, a museum space or an arts organization, I found that the best way to get people involved in your programming is free food. Like, I would really just like, that is fundamentally like,
That's not why we put out snacks.
If you have a meal there, or you have a way of feeding people, that brings in, and you go out to these street level organizations and you tell them, we are going to be providing food. Folks can just show up, have some food, and look around. That's a huge way of bringing in people who would otherwise just never think to show up or just not be interested in attending. And I think that's just like one of the biggest keys to it, is to think about what the people that you're engaging with need, just as much as what you as an institution need. And for a lot of those people, you know, those needs that they have are very, very fundamental. Like, for my work at the Village, like, I'm like, what do you guys need me to bring? They're like, socks. We don't have a chance to wash our socks ever. We're wearing the same pair of socks for 2 weeks in a row. So just bring, you know, an 8-pack of socks from Costco when you show up. And I'm like, wow, that's not something I would have thought. You know, you're thinking about like, oh, like I can do like some really advanced Google searching or something like that. It's just meeting people where they are, even if you don't necessarily know, or you don't have to walk in with assumptions about how to do that. Yeah. And I'm sorry, that's kind of a totally different tangent than what you guys were talking about, where you're bringing an arts organization into the museum space. But I think it's also important to talk about how the museum space can bring itself out onto the street.
That's kind of what I was looking at.
And meeting people where they're at and what they're, and really getting at what their needs are. And I think this is a lot about the relationship that you two developed in terms of you had different needs and interests, but you found a space where those came together. And it took time. But could you say a little bit more about the actual, like, how you agreed, like how you came together, how you know, who approached whom, for example? Because I feel like that dynamic can sometimes be tricky for larger institutions, like who's inviting whom in, or who shares the idea first, how that kind of came together.
Yeah, we presented a proposal, I believe, to Banff originally that kind of laid out what a collaboration could look like. You guys took it back, spoke about it amongst your team, and then from there we kind of met and the chips fell where they were. But I think from a need perspective, correct me if I'm off, but you know, for us, we're always looking for space and support to bring our community together. And so to have Fields be our largest event and have the preview at the museum was huge for us. So for us, it was space in this collaboration. So them to open up their space to our community and have an event of our vibe and our style in the museum was the huge key for us in terms of this particular collaboration. And I think from Anne's perspective, I don't want to speak for you, Anne, but you mentioned that you know, just introducing a lot of the work that the museum had to offer to our demographic specifically was also something that was appealing on your end. And so I think that's part of where the synergy was.
Yeah, I was interested in your vibe and your style. and your audience, who I thought that we were doing things at the museum that your audience would enjoy, but didn't know about.
Exactly.
Because it's a museum. I had a teacher, I mean, not that your audience doesn't go to museums, but I had a teacher in college who was very disparaging of art museums. He called them art mausoleums. It's where the art goes to die. And in a way that can be kind of true. It's, you know, they can be these static, dusty spaces, and we don't want our museum to be like that, even though they're, you know, part of our charge is preserving history. That's very important, but we also want it to be a living space that is reciprocal, where people are bringing things into the museum as well as coming away with things. And felt like both the performers that you brought in, the vibe that you brought in, and the people that you brought in all lifted up the museum, and hopefully all those people found something within our walls that they enjoyed and brought back out with them. So that was where it felt like a good fit. But I think a little bit of that initial approach too was kind of luck, because it was luck of timing, and our media relations manager, AJ, wanted our programs to be written about in Wine and Bow Ties.
Oh, right.
And so he had reached out to get editorial coverage from you all, and came back to me and said, you know, they're great, and they want to talk about a partnership and doing something. And I was like, I'm kind of new to town. I'm like, who are they? What do they do? And then my daughter, who's 20, was like, oh my God, Mom. Just Instagramming from your museum. And I said, oh, okay. And then one of our curatorial assistants was like, oh, they do Fields. It's awesome. You got to talk to them. So, so I heard from people with, you know, people that I trust, one of my colleague and my daughter, that, that these were people that I should trust too. And we met them and they presented this amazing proposal. We were like, wow, this is so fancy.
I know Evelyn and Ashara wanted to jump in, so
I've talked to you.
Well, I have a question. It's, you know, museums can be very elitist places, and I wonder, you know, as the conversation nationally has started to kind of unravel into how we really start to look at how white supremacy has shaped and continues to like frame the conversation inside many museums. Are there particular or specific conversations that happen in your institutions that say, you know, we are willing to be vulnerable in a way that says we have to be honest about what's actually going on and whose culture is being displayed, who's being researched, who's, you know, to what benefit is it to the institution to actually diversify not only the art that's hanging on the wall, but the kind of programming and the kind of partners that you have. And, you know, it was to BAMFA's benefit, absolutely, as it was to the benefit of white bow ties. But there has to be some space where folks feel like I have someone who I trust if I don't actually have my own personal experiences with people who are not like me. You know, it's like if you've never had a conversation with a black woman before, you might think that the one that you talk to is kind of the representation of the black woman that you might ever meet. Or if you've never actually, if you saw this brother walking down the street, will you clutch your purse?
Right.
I mean, it's like...
No, with his scarf, no.
Not and I mean, and it's a real question, because it's like when I walk into a museum, you know, it's like, it depends on the museum. You know, I may or may not be engaged with kindness at the front desk.
I would say, Ashara, just from where I'm standing or sitting, I feel like since we've been talking a lot more in the field about community engagement, I feel like there's more conversation around racism and white oppression and field-wide, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface still. And I feel like there's a lot of talking about it and then how it plays out and how even our white allies sometimes look at these moments very differently than the people that are experiencing them. And so I feel like I just don't think field-wide that we're there and having these really hard conversations. And I think it gets like you said, it's like, okay, we're doing good right now. Oh, this is too hard. This is too scary. This is too, I have to look too deep into myself. And at the end of the day, you know, we're people. We come with our baggage, we have our personalities, and sometimes you can't change personalities. Personalities are where they are, you know, and I think there's a level of self-awareness and a level of vulnerability and will want to change that needs to happen. And I mean, it's like I said, it's on the surface. Actually, it's a perfect segue because one of the things I wanted to mention during announcements that I forgot is there's this great organization. It's called Mass Action, and they're mostly in the East Coast. If you haven't looked at their website, please check it out because it's the first time I went to a conference that was a museum field conference where people are like, I see the PowerPoint slide that says white oppression in museums. I was like, what? So I was like, wow, I'm in a different space now. So I think there are some people that are being really bold in trying to have that conversation, but I don't think it's pervasive, and I don't think it's scary. It's scary for a lot of people. It's scary for me to put myself out there and feel like I'm gonna be rejected or be looked at in a different way, and I think it's scary for people to see, you know, what their faults are. So.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're overwhelmed with this is not the America I know comments I'm seeing in all of my social media feeds this week, and I'm going, what is wrong? Do y'all live underneath? Yeah. You don't know that this is America. Yeah. Oh, this is us.
Yeah.
This is classic. This is absolutely what this country is rooted in, basically. Politics are rooted
And culture, and there's nothing more political than art. Nothing.
Exactly, yeah.
Nothing more political than art. It's like economically, political, power-wise, you know, it's just nothing.
Yep.
And that's why we have to continue to, like, I don't want to say segregate, but definitely call out particular kinds of art.
Right.
And I mean, just in the last 2 days, I've seen like a couple of articles, one of the Times, around, you know, why haven't there been any like great black gallerists or, you know, black art buyers like since the 60s. It's like, well, you know, y'all didn't even let black people put art in museums until there was a protest. You know, it's like there's. So I'm just wondering if folks in this room who work in institutions and with institutions, are there actual conversations that are unfolding like at the table, and if they are, who's leading them? You know, is it white folks checking for their own privilege? Is it people of color who are doing the teaching or having to do the teaching or expected to do the teaching? You know, are you paying consultants to come in and work with you? I'm just,
Yeah.
you know,
I think it's all those things.
I'm just wondering if those are.
No, and I appreciate that you brought, I mean, of course you have to bring that to me.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I've also never had a museum job, and I've never worked in a museum.
And they are very, very, very white places. And I think many of it, you know, I'm a white person working in a white place and see, you know, one thing that I've had to do as a white person working in a white field with a whole bunch of other white people is overcome my fear of making a mistake when I try to talk about that, because it's scary. I don't always know what I'm talking about because I know where I come from, and I know that the current dynamic is not the best one for anybody. It's not where it should be. And we, you know, the staff of our museum is not nearly as diverse as the programming of our museum. And that is one of those things that it's because of the structure of our society and our education system and the access that people have as small children. You don't have as many people coming into these fields where you know you're not going to make any money, and you know, there are
stay a long time too. You know, staff
Yeah.
turnover is really low. I work at the Asian
Right.
Art Museum, and I've been there 20 years, and so people don't leave. That's part of, I think, one of the diversity challenges I see is that there aren't a lot of positions available. Even if you really wanted to hire, you know, and our staff is really diverse, but and we have a Chinese-born director. So I mean, we do, but most of the senior staff are, well, there's some Asian leaders, but there are a lot of white people in the higher level positions. I was going to suggest that I think, well, I have two thoughts. My name's Deb. I have a lot of thoughts, but to the issue of diversifying, you know, museums and having the conversations that you're talking about. I mean, they're definitely happening, and who's leading them is it's usually the younger staff who are really wanting to go there and program and, you know, address it, because that's their world. They've you know, inhabited a world where there's intersectionality for them, and they don't see that art is different from life, maybe. Or maybe, and that's an American challenge, is I think our culture really separates art out as an add-on, as an extra, as a nice to have. And I think that's hugely problematic, and we've educated people, we've taken art education out of so many public schools. So I think museums right now are being forced to be more relatable because people aren't accepting their value to society anymore necessarily as, you know, the status quo, because they weren't raised to believe that museums mattered because they didn't have arts education, right? So I do think the education piece is really important, and having you know, curatorial leaders who have a lot of authority in an art museum, that's where I work, but you know, their art historians aren't trained to be like, you know, community activists.
Right.
They're trained to be academics and writers and researchers, and so suddenly we're asking them to like understand. So I think partnering, you know, the kind of partnerships that you see happening, and this one's really exciting and rich to learn from, and it's inspiring to see what you're doing. And I think that's how museums need to immediately start having the conversation, is by partnering with people who are investigating this realm, because we're not going to diversify our staffs overnight. That's going to take, you know, time and an investment and real commitment. And my suggestion or question for everybody is, I think we're all here from institutions, and we're all thinking, how can I better reach my communities? How can I better interact with communities? How can I better partner with communities? How many of us are actually making it very easy, visible, transparent on our websites? How do you approach us? You know, because it just made me think what you were talking about, like, oh, I invested all this energy into developing a relationship that ended up elevating to and hitting a wall. And you found the right people, because, you know, Anne brought everybody to the meeting, which was, you know, because you probably have a senior position, and people will listen to you and be like, okay, I'll write that. You know, but like if like a junior programmer was like, oh, I really want to partner, I'm going to invite the director, and you'd be like, who are you? The director doesn't even know who you are. So I do think that if we could think also, maybe this is something Cultural Connections could help us think through, how can we be better? Because I hear this all the time, you know, I don't know how exhibitions get on your calendar. I'm like, I don't know how they do it. But how do you reach us in programs, you know, or how to engage with us, like who do you contact, and what is, maybe setting up those expectations as institutions, and I think standardizing that a little bit, expectation would be great. Sorry, anyway, that's just a lot.
Well, and I think that we want this conversation to continue, and we can and will do another program around some of these conversations that just started to surface. And it started kind of organically to open up to kind of Q&A and response time, which is great. That's what we wanted. But we also wanted to end with something kind of concrete for all of us to take away and keep thinking about, and hopefully keep discussing if we move over to another space or just another day where we can continue these conversations. A couple of points I wanted to make that I think we're kind of bringing together some of the different voices here was about the importance of relationships and connections, that it takes time to build those relationships and trust, but beyond just whatever project you're working on, that's one piece of it, but then you all are individually connected to all sorts of people who then you start to build awareness of, hey, this is a space where people feel welcome, or I know somebody that's connected to that. And so I think that idea of connections and relationships has more power than sometimes we give space for. And then the other piece that I want, that Evelyn and Ashara were kind of getting at, was this accountability. Mm-hmm. How are organizations and individuals holding yourself accountable for looking at these issues? How do we know what needs to be addressed? How are we working with community and thinking through some of these deeper issues? And at Cultural Connections, that I'm a big fan of transparency. Ariana and I are going to be board president and vice president next year, and we are very excited to dive into this with the board and then look at how that can be reflected in the programming as well. So, of course, depending where you are in your institution or organization, you may or may not have that kind of power, but just making those decisions where you can to show up every day and look at these issues. So thank you all for the rich conversation. And before we end, we do have a little bit of time, and we had one kind of final question for all the panelists, and then we wanted you all to spend some time thinking about this question. So as first.
We'll do it together.
What are the reflective objective or evaluative tools you use to check yourself? So what are your principles, your best practices for engaging with communities and relationship building?
I'll start since I got called dad. So something that I kept on wanting to share when we're having a conversation about relationships is that something that really struck me a while ago was right when I started doing fundraising at the museum, someone said to me, for donors, it takes like 8 interactions to get them to donate money at the museum, or donate money, so that they're wined and dined, and you go and you do this 8 times, and it's usually with a director, or somebody, in senior position, especially if it's big money, right? Yet we expect that community is just gonna come because we're like, hey, aren't we great? And so the idea of relationship building and having to have these constant interactions, I remember you both said it, where it's like, you had this kind of culminating moment, and I was like, ta-da, we're doing this together. But it sounded like your institution was already working with some of the artists. There was already some intersections where they were building on things. And maybe it was a lot more organic, but I think you could be a lot more intentional on doing that, and doing small kind of dating moments with organizations and other folks until you decide, oh, we are a right fit, and here's where we can go to the next level. So this idea of cultivating, because we throw all these terms all the time, cultivating relationships with community, and what does that mean? What does that look like in practice? So that's one of the things I want to share. And then the other thing I would kind of more directly answer your questions, I think one of the things that I try to be really about is whenever I'm meeting, and I try to do that with any new person, is being present. And it sounds like such an easy thing, but like, boom, it's like you're so all over the place, and you miss really big body cues when you're meeting someone new, especially when you're trying to kind of build that trust, and especially when you're representing a big institution, you're missing the like, I don't know what that is, I don't like the way that sounds, and then you also don't take the time to ask. Like, can you say more about that? Can you tell me a little bit more, because I'm not understanding, because either we're embarrassed or whatever. And I think it is about being vulnerable and saying, oh, I'm dumb, or not I'm dumb, that's just something I would say if I didn't know something, but I'm sorry, I just didn't realize that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or this is what I mean by this. But really taking that time, being present, reading, and being in the moment with that person that you're wanting to, really build a relationship and trust with.
Anybody else want to jump in then?
I said it all.
I would agree with, that's the best way to know how you're doing, is just to look at reactions. I mean, to know that sometimes people are very good at hiding the reaction, or it may look like something, you may get it wrong, but if people are engaged, they're engaged. If you want people to smile and they smile and are happy, then and then the other piece is just numbers. Are people coming to your space? Are they, are they coming, and are they engaged? Do they feel, I don't know, how do they feel? How do they look? Are they telling you they're happy? People will tell you if they like what you do. And then I guess if they're not telling you, then okay, well, how can I get people to like me?
Like me.
Well, I think for us, one of the evaluative tools we will use to check our work in this collaboration is whether Wine and Bow Ties wants to do some more. And whether some of the new people that we've met through these couple of events we've done come back on their own. Are we as interesting as I hope we are to them, and will they come back without feels, without Wine and Bow Ties? Will they come back? Will they come back for us, or were they just there for Max? So I think that'll be interesting to see.
And yeah, I appreciate everyone's love. I cannot take full credit for anything that I'm doing. I work with an amazing team of folks that help bring everything to fruition. So I have to acknowledge that. Were you done yet?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think about like, you know, my work started from a passion. You know, like I just loved to write and loved watching YouTube videos and sharing them with people and bringing people to things I thought they would like. That's where everything started. So, you know, they say that you know you do what you're passionate about, it doesn't feel like work, and so it's felt like that for me. I think that's the only reason I've been able to continue this for 9 years is that I've loved doing it. And so one of the evaluative check-ins for me is like, am I having fun? You know, was this a fun experience for me to be a part of? And then I look at my team too, and I make sure that they had a good time too, and they felt empowered. And then, you know, with our work too, like, you know, with websites and art, like so much of it is subjective too. And so we also want to make sure that the rest of the team is having an opportunity to curate or be creative and share those creative insights as well. And so part of what market success for Fields, for example, you know, a lot in the beginning I was doing everything. I would, you know, pick the location, bring on the artist, and curate the whole show, and photograph and do everything. You know, in that situation, everything didn't go well. You know, now we have a little bit larger team, and so you know, I can hand off the curation, I can hand off the photography, I can hand off a lot of the operations and whatnot. And so, yeah, seeing the rest of the team get empowered and do compelling work is also really important.
I just also, you model really well the way you listen and respect your, and I can see the way the relationship develops between you and Anne. Just check that she's done talking. I just wanted to say, I appreciate that. We're talking about reading body language and
I guess I want to offer, and it's not really directly what you're saying, but I think for those of us who are cultural workers and curators and we work in institutions or not, the question for me is, would my ancestors be pleased with my decision? It's, you know, may our ancestors be pleased? Would my great-grandmother be pleased with that decision? Was I kind? Did I teach someone how to do it? Because for me, as an activist and a leader, my job has always been to put myself out of a job. Did I teach someone else how to do it? Because somebody taught me how to do it. You know, and at the end of the day, it's like, someone has to just kind of pull you in and give you a break. It's like, I made a decision that I was not going to get a PhD in art history. I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to study Italian art for 6 years. I'm not going to do it. I mean, it was very clear about it. You know, I was taking curatorial classes. I'm like studying in the Denver Art Museum, and once I saw that they had no real answer as to why the Egyptian art was in the European section, I said, oh, we're done. Why is the Egyptian art in the European art section? Do you not know where Egypt is?
I have the answer for you.
We're done. We're not doing it.
I can actually answer
so,
that question.
Would my grandmother, would my great-grandmother be pleased with the decision I made? Was I kind, and did I teach someone else how to do it?
And that's actually a perfect segue, because we're going to ask you all to start to draft some personal tenets or best practices for how you can approach community engagement, building relationships, and some attributes or skills we thought you could reflect on as you do this, related to Margaret Katayama's new book, Museums Involving Communities. These are just some she lists as important to this work. Examining and paying attention to one's own assumptions, wholeheartedness, humility, fear and courage, patience and tenacity, empathy, the ability to truly listen. So those are just some ideas to reflect on as you take a couple of minutes to jot down some ideas.
Just before we go into that, I have something to piggyback off of what Ashara was asking, which is just the flip side of the idea, would my ancestors be proud, is would the generations after you be proud? Because I think I'm probably the youngest person in this room, and just as a generation, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with my parents, with people who are much older than me who have offered me mentorship. And I think being from the other side of that, or the other side of the dynamic that you guys are kind of describing, I think one of the best ways to check yourself is to check in with the generations who are younger than you. Because people say a lot, you know, kids are the future, we have to trust the future, and yet it's one of those things that, you know, I don't often see happening. So I think that that's just as much of a tool as asking, would my ancestors be proud, is directly going and saying, how do the people who are going to be here after me feel? And how am I passing down what I already have?
Thanks.
Yeah, the ancestral line is forward,
It goes
present.
both ways.
Yeah.
All the ways.
Those before you, those heroes coming, that's the ancestral line, it's not those people only. And it's not even just those people. The beings, all my relations, all the beings. We're in collaboration here on this planet, all the beings.
Moments of quiet reflection and drafting, and then we'll